Well, welcome to another episode of The Deep Dive. We are in a series called The Stories Jesus Tells, where we're looking at different parables while also considering vision. Who are we to be as a church? Where is God leading us? And what can we glean from these parables in terms of application? And so my name is Brad, one of the pastors here at Calvary. I get the pleasure of serving on the teaching team, preaching now and again, joined by friend, co-worker, fantasy baseball enthusiast, master beard grower, Dan Borth.
I work real hard at that last one. I pump my arms 20 times every morning. The hair just... Hi, I'm Dan, and yes, I do like fantasy baseball.
Yeah. So we are in like I said, a series where we're looking at parables.
Yeah.
And specifically, this week we had a couple parables, right, that we were entertaining. Before we really get into those, some of the previous conversations we've been having in these deep dives have related to, well, I had a conversation with Paul where a lot of it was just, introducing himself. And then we talked a little bit about hell and judgment, but it was more from like an apologetic, like it was very quick.
Sounds fun.
Yeah. And then I had a conversation with Brett and Kyle, which they are good friends of mine. The idea is, hey, listen, in the parable of the wheat and the weeds, there's growth that's in focus, and we are called to grow, and yet we can get in the way of that growth. And so just inviting both of them into a conversation of like, hey, how do we grow? And that conversation went kind of a whole bunch of different directions. Would encourage, if you have not, as you're listening, if you did not get a chance to listen to that conversation, invite you to do so. And then last week we really talked about this parable that we looked at of the rich man and Lazarus, and so we got to pick up that hell conversation again, which again, it's just a very striking. We have an image of who Jesus is, and yet he talks about hell and the devil pretty pointedly at a few different places.
I've been asking Brad on social media to advertise those two as what is hell. Listen to the deep dive. Yeah.
So anyway, it is what it is. But anyway, just good to be back in the rhythm. I love this format. But before we look at these parables specifically, what are some maybe overarching principles that we can have in our back pocket as we examine and look at the stories that Jesus tells?
So, like reading parables?
How do we read parables well?
Yeah. Well, I not to oversimplify it, but we have to read them as stories told with a point, and in particular, stories told with a kingdom point. They're kingdom stories. It's like, it's a little bit like, depending on your family or your hobbies, if you slow down, you can hear the stories that people in your circle tell themselves. It could be everything from like why I drive 5 over the speed limit to why I never stop completely at a stop sign. Like it can be why we use this particular lure on this particular lake for fishermen, or why a particular type of yarn for a crocheter is like a preferred type of yarn. Sometimes those things are very true. Sometimes it just comes from a story that like somewhere along the line somebody gave some sense of what something was about, and people go with it. Yeah. It's baseball. Get your elbow up. Yeah. So I think focus on the main point, right? Often when Jesus was telling his parables, he was responding to a particular question. That's right.
Or a presupposition, a prejudice, a misunderstanding. And so he had a pretty singular focus on like the point he's trying to make. It's kind of like when you're having a conversation with someone. My dad comes to mind. The number of times I have heard the phrase, it's kind of like, and then he goes to tell a story that is it's very clear in his mind, the point that he makes, and then but it makes sense. He's trying to illustrate something, and so that's what Jesus is doing too.
Well, there's wisdom in that, because a thing is not necessarily its definition. We have to actually experience the
That's
thing.
really good.
So we can be really clear about what something is or is not through in theology and Christian doctrine. We can be really clear in our doctrines. But the thing is, like, that's not the thing itself. Living it is the thing.
That's really good.
So Jesus often answers sometimes pretty pointed questions, to your point, with, let me tell you a story this is the kingdom of heaven is like. And that is beautiful in one sense. It has always struck me as, if you ever study theology, Brad, correct me if I'm wrong, but when I think back to systematic studies, very few systematic things quote the parables. However, most of what we understand about the kingdom of heaven, that all of the doctrines fit within, are given to us by Jesus in parables.
Yeah,
and then they're
that's
explained
phenomenal.
and unpacked other places.
That's a phenomenal point. I've never thought about that, but that's true.
It's a Western mind kind of thing.
Yep.
It's not a bad thing. In fact, my mentor was one of the most gifted systematic preachers I've ever met. And there's a place for it, and it definitely connects with especially modern people, makes bridges, for postmodern to modern, all of that. However, we do, I think, want to be humble, like in that our explanations aren't the thing. And when Jesus was asked, "What's the kingdom of heaven?" A lot of these stories is what he wanted us to hear.
That's really good. That's really good. So, in these stories, focus on the main point, the main thing that Jesus is speaking of. That doesn't mean we can't learn from other areas of it as well. I think another principle maybe would be, and this applies for any time we're opening up God's Word and learning, like there is a distance between ourselves and the original hearers. And so the illustrations that Jesus uses, because he's telling a story, he is making an illustration. It's going to include things that we're not familiar with, but his original hearers would have been very familiar with.
Yes.
So a couple weeks ago, again, when preaching on Matthew chapter 13, the wheat and the weeds, made a point about, hey, the type of weed would have been probably pretty familiar with the original audience. And so
a lot like my lawn, my weeds and my grass are pretty indistinguishable. Both are not all that great.
Yes, and yet we like to read into it from our place of, it's really easy to distinguish the Christians from the non-Christians. Yeah. And that's just not the point of the story.
Nope.
So we need to do some work to understand the illustrations, the things that Jesus is speaking. And then I think a third point would be, or a third principle for how to read parables well. The reason Jesus is using a story is because it's a backdoor way of making a point and changing perception on things. And so if we don't read the parables and allow our perceptions to be changed, we're not reading the parable appropriately.
I would even throw this out, and maybe not for our time or even the point of this conversation, but something I wrestle with is the best way to explain a parable by explaining the parable like prose, bullet by bullet, or is the best way to explain a parable by simply retelling the story again and then sitting in it with somebody else? I don't know.
That's good.
I don't know.
It'd be a really short sermon to just read the parable.
I don't want to say something disruptive, but most of Jesus were, according to what we have in the text.
That's fair. I mean, even the Sermon on the Mount, you can read it out loud in about 15, 20 minutes.
Wisdom from the master. Yeah.
Anyway, all right. So let's dive in this week. So this week you said there's 3 parables.
3, yes.
That we're gonna read.
That's right.
And then just unpack and talk through a little bit.
All right. Let's do it. This is Matthew 13, starting in verse 44. Actually, Brad, it follows the explanation of the weeds and the wheat that you shared. Okay, the first parable. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. And then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field.
Full stop.
Full stop. So, and that's the end of the parable.
Yep.
So think this is a time when there's no way to document that moment. There's no way to validate that he found it. There's no way to take a selfie next to the treasure.
No NFT.
Nothing. Yeah, that's right. This is the first time NFTs would have been really helpful. And it's not crypto. That's a great point. Very tangible. And so he finds this treasure, and he knows that unless he's proactive, this treasure could become someone else's. And so he does what actually makes a lot of sense. He hides it again. He goes away, and the only action he takes is buying the entire field.
Yeah.
You know, he wants to make sure that everything that treasure is he's going to have access to.
And no one else is able to, like, go and steal it. And
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
Claim ownership.
Again, there's a lot of details that we could fill in that we don't want to miss the main point.
I think so. I think we just have to hear it. And the kingdom of heaven is like treasure. The kingdom of heaven is the treasure. And when somebody finds it and understands what is the grace of God in Jesus, like it's so valuable. It's so worth actually like a life redirect. It's so worth just buying in, and that now becomes, I mean, like we could start drawing other things, and I don't want to say more, but I do think in the ancient Near East, like property ownership told a story of like personal connection and history. Like for this person to sell their stuff and go buy this field says something in society. It's a I'm going to be here and not there. I'm going to be associated with this property and its history, and not that property and even potentially my history. I don't want to overdraw it, but I do think there are tones there. So yeah, that's what the kingdom of heaven is like.
I love the simple simile, right? That's here. Again, he's. It probably doesn't change the perception of the hearers if he were to say, the kingdom of heaven is the redemptive reign and rule of God in our world, right? Like
beginning with through creation, even in the fall.
Yeah.
Into,
and this is what it looks like in its purest. It's helpful. It captures the imagination.
Yeah.
You can't hear this parable without imagining the guy who discovers it and who goes and.
Well, I have I believe I shared this story, but 2 years ago, one of my best friends in life, he passed away suddenly. He was driving his car, passed away. Medically, I've never heard a conclusive explanation. Just bizarre. But part of his story, his name's Matt, part of his story is when he was a teenager, he got involved in a youth group. But when he heard about the gospel, and it was like when he discovered the treasure in the field, nothing was the same. He reoriented his whole life to knowing, following, and sharing Jesus. And he had some cool things. So he and I became friends in college. He also, oddly, that was in Texas. He came here to St. Charles area, oddly enough, was the youth pastor at the church I grew up at, was the youth pastor to my own sisters. And when he passed away, I got a sense of his impact. He wound up planting a church in Marble Falls, which is Austin area, Texas, outside. Brad, I've never so far, and I've known a lot of really wonderful believers. I've never seen somebody who had such a diverse from all over the country, and sure it had to do with tragedy too. But everyone there could say, this man encouraged me in like to know Jesus or to follow Jesus or to share Jesus. It was incredible. And that parable came to mind. Like my friend Matt, when he found Jesus, he sold everything he had and he made his whole life about that. It was beautiful.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think the word that sticks out to me in this parable, right, is in his joy. Yeah. You know, it's not in his shrewdness. It's not in his ability to take advantage of a situation. I think has your family watched the Santa Clauses?
Yeah, we did.
On Disney Plus?
We did.
Okay.
Yes.
So we're several weeks removed from Christmas, but I think this illustration maybe still pulls.
I see where you're going. This is right on.
Yeah. So you have so in the Santa Clauses, right? Tim Allen, who's Santa Claus, he's having a little bit of trouble. He isn't able to be Santa Claus in the same way that he had been Santa Claus. So he expects or assumes like, oh, I'm probably, I need to retire and it's time for a new person to be Santa Claus. So he, does some, open interview, Peyton Manning comes in and interviews, which is a great cinematic,
it's a wonderful scene.
It really is. But this character, I forget his name, but played by I don't remember Cal. Oh man, he's in House. He was in Obama's administration for a bit. Anyway, there's a character
I don't have my phone,
he's
or else I'd
he's
look
kind
it
of
up.
a tech CEO. He's struggling. He's trying to make money. He's had his own personal tragedy happen in his own life. He's a single dad with a daughter trying to make her world, and he gets the opportunity, the job essentially that he interviews for. Pretty horrible interview, but has a moment where he kind of shows some redemption, and he is offered the job of Santa Claus, to which he accepts.
Christmas now, was it? Christmas everywhere?
Christmas every day.
Christmas every day.
Yeah. So, and then what he does is he takes it and he sees the opportunity to make money. Even starts with a good motivation, like, hey, how do we make Christmas better, essentially, and bring more joy to more people? So he manipulates the situation a little bit. He makes Christmas every day. He loses the magic and the wonder of Christmas, and he takes this thing that is really meant to just be a joyous thing for so many people, and he tries to capitalize it a little bit and take advantage. And so what ends up being like,
and interestingly, I'm really glad you use this analogy. He intends to do good to others while profiting for himself.
Yes.
He wants both things to be true. Yeah.
Yeah. Because he comes out, like, his company hadn't been successful, and he finds a way to use the magic of the North Pole, and
that's right.
Along with the technology he's developed. And what you said, he wants to take the magic, the wonder of Christmas, and do good for others while also profiting. Yeah. So anyway, and then, not to be spoiler alert, but it doesn't go well for him. And in the end, everything turns out well. But
it's interesting. The treasure sets its own parameters for ownership. And that, again, there's just something in that. It's not the discoverer that gets to decide anything more than are they in or are they out on the treasure.
Yeah. But, cool.
So the second parable. It's actually wildly similar. So Matthew says that Jesus continues and says, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls, who, on finding one pearl of great value, went and sold all that he had and bought that pearl.
One thing.
So we're getting a little closer. This is somebody who has they're in the business of pearls. They're looking for a really special pearl. And the deciding moment comes when they find the thing they're looking for. I'm sure they had some qualifying something.
Yeah, had something they were looking for specifically.
Sets it apart. They do everything they can to own that one pearl. They understand the pearl's value against all other pearls to the point that, at least the way I hear the story, is the only rational thing to do, understanding this value, was to mortgage everything and go all in on it.
Which wasn't. I'm sitting there that's not rational at all.
Doesn't feel that way.
Because okay, well, if we take this for what it says, he sold all that he had. Okay, so he sold his house, he sold his clothes, he sold other things that could potentially bring him income.
The naked man with a pearl.
Yes, new parable title. And yet, as you said, the most rational thing. He did the thing that was incredibly irrational. Right. Didn't make any sense, not efficient, is the most rational response. And
that's kind of at the heart of what I wanted to share is, the value of a thing. Sorry for stumbling over my words there, but the value of the thing is what you or I are willing to pay for it. But you remember absolute values in
mathematics,
positive, negative, what's just the numerical.
St. Charles West.
Yeah.
Shout out Dr. Sunshine.
Dude. Shout out to Dr. Sunshine. What a great person. Yeah. The cost of a thing, the value of a thing, is what we're willing to pay to obtain it. But the real true cost, the true assessment of what is the full value of that thing, is what it cost me in terms of what I'm also not having because I have it. Yeah. So really simply drawn up, if myself and my daughter both want a pack of gum from the store, $1.50 for a pack of gum, I'm not going to feel that personally. For my daughter, she's pulling out her change purse, and she's counting the few dollars she has, which, it's more than a few because I'm proud of her and she budgets well. Yeah. But she's going to pay, it's going to cost her more in terms of what she's not able to do with it. She can't get another toy. She can't get other candy. She's going to have to wait till something else comes in, or she does some chores or whatever. the cost of a thing, yes, it's what we'll pay for it, but the true cost is what we cannot have because we want this thing. And I think that's the heartbeat behind this particular parable is this man is willing to say that this pearl is worth me not having everything I've had to this point. Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like that. So I hear a lot of value in this for maybe people who have been searching philosophy the better part of their life, or looking for meaning in relationship, or looking at the heavens and wondering. But when you hear the gospel, the good news of Jesus, and you recognize it for what it is, like it's got such great value, it's worth moving toward it at the cost of everything else.
Yeah, that's really, really good.
It's not mine. It's not original.
Well, it's a good line, right? It's a good thought.
Yeah.
I know you shared that in teaching team a couple weeks ago, and that resonates. I think about the housing market. What is a house worth? Well, it's worth what people are willing to pay for. It's worth we find it value for the housing market and the comps and the relationship to other houses of similar location, similar size, similar specs, and yet. My mother-in-law, she's actually they're trying to buy a house right now and looking at different houses, and there's one that they probably could have had if they had been willing to go up to a certain dollar figure. Yeah. And the broker, the agent on the other end was doing some shady stuff, like I think probably lying a little bit and saying, "Oh, there's another offer that also came in at the same price, max offer most." And she's like, "No, I already gave you my max. Like this is what I am willing to spend," which is really what the value of a house is. It's only worth what someone is willing.
That's true.
To pay for.
I remember going to the car dealership with my grandfather, and he prided himself on, "That's my number." He'd stand up and walk out. Interestingly, it turns out the couple times I went, the salesperson was certainly willing to figure out a different number than what they had. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, and now you've got the internet, and you can't.
Do you ever go car shopping and go on like Kelley Blue Book and look at like the one that does the buyer's guide? I can't think of it right now. But you can get like a true cost of owning a particular vehicle. They average out like what do most people who own this car pay in repairs over time? How quickly does it wear out tires? Like it's fascinating. Factors in miles per gallon. Your analogy reminded me of that analogy that what the thing itself costs is one thing. What does it cost to have the thing over the long haul is another equation. And this suggests the kingdom of heaven is far greater value in the long run than anything any of us currently bring to the table.
That's really good. All right, so then the third parable.
Parable 3. All right, so this one is not in the same vein, but I do think it's connected. So Jesus, again, this is verse 47. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and gathered fish of every kind. When it was full, men drew it ashore and sat down and sorted the good into containers, but threw away the bad. So it will be at the close of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So we have this hell image again.
Yeah, so similar, even the similar phrase from earlier in chapter 13, the weeping and gnashing of teeth. Yeah.
Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like a net that pulls all sorts out of the sea. I went, my father-in-law, he has his brothers, and they go fishing a couple times a year together. This one time we were using trot lines. You familiar with trot lines? They run across a smaller river, and we pull this trot line up, and catfish on one side, nothing on a few hooks, and then like these freshwater eels in the middle. And those things aren't just not the fish we wanted. Like
nasty.
They're disgusting. Yeah. So you throw back what you're not looking for. Some things you throw back because it's not the catfish you want. Some things you throw back because it's inedible and disgusting. So like this makes sense.
Yeah. No alligator gars are making it.
I don't think so. So what is Jesus saying? The kingdom of heaven's like a the the angels, kind of sort out good from the bad. I hear echoes of the weeds and wheat in this. Brad, do you remember when we were going through covenant, with some professors who talked about getting at the question of who are the people of God? And they used to always draw circles, not concentric circles, uneven circles. There's this idea that here's everybody who's currently got a finger touching the kingdom of heaven in one way or another. And the reality is such that out of everyone who's in contact with the kingdom of heaven to one degree or another, that there are people whose hearts have truly been regenerated by the grace of God and are, it's like they're experiencing the grace of God. And that's always a smaller subset of the total that are touching it. I don't know about you, but this is what I hear in these parables. It's almost like a hey friend, don't just get close enough to the kingdom of God to smell it. You're going to have to digest the thing. Don't, what I hear Jesus saying in these is, it's not enough to swim in the water. You're going to have to allow the grace of God to turn you into the right kind of fish. And
it's not enough to get caught in the net.
Yeah, that's right. And today I feel like this is one of the parables that, if somebody today were asking themselves, what's the real nature of Christianity or church involvement? This is a really good question. Because we try to build good nets. We want to catch people. We want to capture their attention. But the question isn't necessarily for us, how can we only find the right fish? We're part of the kingdom of heaven that's like the net. The question is for each fish in the net to really allow the Holy Spirit to ask that question. Hey, what's going on with you?
Yeah.
Is your faith in Christ?
Yeah.
Have you understood the value of the kingdom of heaven? Have you bought in, or are you doing something else? Are you trying to leverage this for your own advantage, et cetera?
Yeah, and then you have here the angels, and not that the parable is the place where we develop our full angelology or whatever, but
that's right.
It's also not the fish that are separating themselves.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
We're not the fish are just the fish, and so there is something to be said too about how often we, we look around the room and we make the decisions of
that's a great point.
They're not.
That's a great point.
They're not the good fish. They're not the thing that Jesus is fishing for. But I am. It's no, that's leave it up to the one who's actually doing it.
Well, and I think for the hearer, it kind of invites this okay, if that's the case, how do I see from heaven's perspective? What would make the difference between one fish or the other? And that brings us to the point where then we can ask questions, I think, of ourselves. I think one of the most valuable questions in the kingdom of God is what's really going on with me.
Yes.
I think Jesus invites that. I don't think he invites faking it, posturing. I think he invites honesty. And, ironically enough, we happen to not be fish. So Jesus gives a lot to think about, and I think the best answer, what's the kingdom of heaven like? It's like treasure in a field. It's like a pearl of great value. It's like fish caught in a net, and that's what this kingdom is like.
That's really good. That's really good. So we have a minute left before I hit the conclusion. I feel like there's a joke in here, with fish and water, right? Like you ask what, someone what's water like, and it's wet, blah blah blah. You ask a fish what's water like, and they're like, "What's water?" Because it's just the thing that they swim in all the time.
It's the thing.
And I do wonder if could we ever get to a place where the kingdom is something that we don't even have to describe because it's all around us, and everything else is compared to it.
Yeah.
So anyway, just a thought to end. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of The Deep Dive. It's been good to be back in the rhythm of doing these conversations. We want to be a people that, as we say, keep our Bibles open, that are curious about the world and the faith that God allows us to have. And you can find this resource and more on our website, calvary.church/resources. As always, email us at podcasts@calvary.church. Go in grace and peace. Have a fantastic week, and we'll catch you again next week.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive, a Calvary Church Media Productions podcast. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts.